Born in 1936 in Providence, Rhode Island, Frank Caprio grew up in a humble household of Italian immigrants. His father sold fruit on the streets, while his mother tended to the home. From an early age, Frank learned two values that would shape his life: the dignity of honest work and the power of empathy. Years later, when he would take the bench as a municipal judge in Providence, those same virtues would echo in every ruling he made. He became a legendary figure, not for his legal rigidity, but for the human warmth, compassion, and fairness with which he treated every citizen. In his courtroom, no one was invisible. Everyone received his attention, his respect, and above all, justice. Before we dive into this emotional story filled with powerful lessons, take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That's what keeps us inspired to bring you more meaningful content like this. Now let's walk this journey together. On the other side of history, in an age marked by bronze and blood, Leonidas was born, son of Anaxandridas II, king of Sparta. He lived between 540 BC and 480 BC, and from a young age was shaped by the unforgiving Spartan system. Trained under the brutal Agog regime, he learned to endure pain, hunger, and fear. There was no comfort, no mercy. Spartan virtue was defined by courage, honor, and sacrifice for the homeland. And when Leonidas ascended the throne, he became the embodiment of those ideals. His name has echoed through the centuries as the king who led 300 men against an army of thousands. Not to claim victory, but to become a symbol of resistance. Frank Caprio's weapon was compassion, Leonidas's the sword, and yet both served the same principle: to protect their people. Caprio looked into the weary eyes of a 96-year-old man and saw not a violator of traffic laws, but a father still fighting for his son. When that man stood in court, fined for speeding, Caprio didn't see a criminal. He saw a silent hero, and he said, "You are a good man. You truly represent everything America stands for." That phrase echoes with the same power as one attributed to Leonidas, when, according to Plutarch, he replied to the Persian Xerxes, who demanded he lay down his arms, by saying, "Come and take them, Molon Labe." There is no pride in inflicting pain, but there is honor in resisting. Leonidas didn't fight for personal glory, but for duty. Just as Caprio did not judge to punish, but to guide. In this special, we imagine the improbable, a conversation between two men forged in different eras, but united by virtue. We'll explore 5 lessons Leonidas and Caprio would share if they sat side by side. In each, we'll see how their lives, contexts, and philosophies reveal stoic values, applied either on the battlefield or in the courtroom. Because, in the end, what makes a man truly great is not the size of the army he leads, nor the title he holds. It is his capacity to serve others, even when that service demands courage, sacrifice, or deep compassion. If Leonidas symbolizes the virtue of courage, Caprio represents that of humanity. Two sides of the same coin, the coin of true justice. Sparta was not a city of written laws, but of values passed down through tradition. A king's word held as much weight as the blade of a sword. For Leonidas, justice wasn't a philosophical debate, it was lived practice. Justice was what a man does when all seems lost, but he refuses to abandon his post. When, at Thermopylae, the oracle predicted Sparta's fall unless one of its kings died, Leonidas did not hesitate. He walked toward destiny. He died, but saved his city. His courage was justice embodied through sacrifice. Frank Caprio, more than 2 millennia later, made his decisions in a different arena, the courtroom. But the principle remained the same. In a world where the law often serves the powerful, Caprio chose to serve human truth. When he dismissed a man's fine because the infraction had occurred while rushing his child to medical care, He did something Leonidas would understand. He followed not the cold code of law, but the moral code of conscience. Courage isn't just facing an army, Leonidas would say. It's standing firm against the pressure to punish when your heart knows it must forgive. And justice is never one size fits all, Caprio would reply. It takes courage to see the difference between a mistake and a story. From this, we learn that courage is the backbone of true justice, whether wielding a sword or rendering a verdict with a firm, empathetic smile. Compassion is not weakness. Leonidas understood pain, rigor, and discipline more intimately than most. From the age of 7, his life was shaped by the agog, a military training system so severe it stripped boys of childhood and forged them into soldiers. Complaining was forbidden. Tears were weakness. Pity was seen as a crack in the warrior's armor. Yet Leonidas knew well that true strength is not born from emotional emptiness, but from mastering one's emotions in service of something greater. Frank Caprio, an American judge of the 21st century, lived in a reality far from Sparta, but carried a heart that Leonidas would have recognized. In one of his most memorable sessions, a Syrian immigrant appeared before him, head bowed, face aged, not by time but by anxiety. The man had committed a minor infraction, illegal parking. But when Caprio asked about his life, he learned the man had come to the United States fleeing civil war, trying to protect his children. With tears in his eyes, Caprio smiled. "You've already paid a far greater price than this ticket," and he dismissed the fine. In a world where power is often used as a tool of oppression, Caprio chose to use it as a bridge of understanding. Where others saw case numbers, he saw human beings, people with history, context, and scars. That choice requires courage. It demands moral resilience, and yes, it demands compassion. This is precisely what authentic Stoicism defends. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and one of Stoicism's great voices, wrote, "If someone does wrong, ask yourself, what led them to that?" Stoic philosophy isn't cold, it's firm, and there's a profound difference. Firmness allows you to say no when necessary, but also to say, "I understand," when someone has fallen and needs a hand to rise. Leonidas, before his 300 men, on his final night before the last stand, knew death was certain. Yet he walked among his soldiers, looked each one in the eye, allowed for brief smiles, parting words, even silence. He knew those men weren't just fighting for Sparta. They were fighting because he stood with them, because deep in their chests, they felt their king understood them. That silent compassion present on the battlefield wasn't weakness, it was leadership. It was humanity woven into the armor of duty. Caprio, by contrast, did not carry a sword, but a robe. Still, his battle was constant, the battle against indifference, against blind bureaucracy, against a system that often punishes more for appearances than intent. He showed the world that a courtroom can be a place not just of judgment, but of hope. A mother who couldn't pay a fine because she needed to buy milk for her child. Caprio would smile, listen, and forgive. But he also left a public lesson, that this woman was doing her best with the little she had. And that deserves respect, not punishment. Like Leonidas, Frank Caprio led by example. In times of war, a merciless general might inspire fear, but only a just leader inspires love and true loyalty. The same applies to civilian leaders. A judge who merely applies sentences with cold detachment may be feared, but one who listens with care, acts with integrity, and respects human dignity, that one becomes eternal. Perhaps, if they could sit at a table between worlds, Leonidas would say, "In war, I had to hide my compassion to protect my men, but I never stopped feeling it." And Caprio would reply, "In court, I revealed my compassion to remind the law that it serves the people, not the other way around." This is the essence of true Stoic leadership, to act with reason, to serve with virtue, and to never forget that every human being, even the most flawed, carries within them a story worth hearing. Frank Caprio taught the modern world something Leonidas knew in silence. Compassion is not weakness. It is strength under control. It is justice with a soul, law and honor. In Sparta, the law was more than a set of rules. It was a silent moral pact, passed from generation to generation, sealed by the blood of those who fell in battle and the silence of those who stood firm. Leonidas had no need for written codes. His compass was honor. And for a Spartan, honor was inseparable from justice. Breaking one's word, fleeing responsibility, betraying duty, these weren't just shameful acts. They were unthinkable. The word honor carried the same weight as a shield. To lose it was worse than death. Frank Caprio was born into another time, a world of constitutions, legislatures, and complex legal systems. Yet the dilemma remained. How does one apply the law without betraying honor? How does one respect the legal text without erasing human dignity? In one of his most symbolic decisions, Caprio judged a man ticketed for parking illegally. The man explained he was taking his disabled son to physical therapy and had no place to park. The violation was clear, but Caprio, looking into that father's eyes, saw something more. Sacrifice, desperation, quiet effort. And so he said, "The law gives me the authority to judge you, but my conscience obliges me to understand you." The result: the man was absolved, and the video reached millions. Leonidas, facing Thermopylae, also had a choice. The law of man said retreat, military logic said suicide, but honor said stay, protect your homeland, inspire those who will follow. And so he stayed. In both cases, law was surpassed by something higher, justice aligned with virtue. For Stoicism, that is the true moral compass. The Stoics didn't reject laws, but warned that laws which violate virtue or ignore the common good are not truly just. Seneca said it well: "Not everything legal is moral, and not everything moral is legal." Frank Caprio, while never violating the rules, stretched them to the limits of empathy. He applied penalties when needed, but with humanity. He didn't wear his robe as a shield of arrogance, but as a bridge between rigor and heart. Leonidas taught that blind obedience is not virtue. Virtue is to think, to choose, and to act, even when everything is against you, even the rule books. When the Spartan council gave him leave to retreat, he chose to die. Not out of vanity, but because he knew his gesture would become a code more enduring than any law. The code of example. Caprio, in his long career, never sought fame. But by humanizing justice, he elevated it. He helped thousands, maybe millions, believe once more that the law need not be an instrument of fear, but a tool of balance. Let us imagine an improbable dialogue between these two icons. Leonidas: "The law protects the strong, honor protects the weak. Which do you choose?" Caprio: "The law judges actions. Honor understands intentions. A just judge must hear both sides, including the invisible." At their core, both men teach us that true justice is not found in cold codes, but in the moral wisdom of those who apply them. To honor the law is not to hide behind it, but to use it to do what is right, not merely what is allowed. Today, as many cry out for order and others for empathy, Caprio and Leonidas remind us that these forces are not opposites, they are complements. Law without honor becomes tyranny. Honor without law becomes chaos. But together they form true justice. Leadership by example. In times of crisis, words become cheap. Fiery speeches, hollow promises, and commands from above often fall flat when not backed by action. Leonidas and Frank Caprio understood this in different but complementary ways. To lead is not to command. It is to step forward. To be the first to act with virtue, even when no one is watching, even when everyone expects you to give up. Leonidas did not need to shout to inspire. His presence alone was command enough. When he led the 300 Spartans and marched to Thermopylae, he never asked others to do what he himself would not. He slept beside his soldiers, ate the same rations, carried the same armor. When the time came for the final assault against the Persians, Leonidas did not stay behind the lines. He was the first to advance. His leadership wasn't found in a throne or a title. It lived in every silent action that spoke louder than any decree. Frank Caprio, in his Providence courtroom, faced a different kind of battle. The battle against public distrust. Thousands of people, crushed by bureaucracy and afraid of an impersonal system, entered his courtroom expecting coldness, indifference, or sarcasm. And instead they found something else. They found a man with attentive eyes, a calm smile, and a willingness to listen. A man who didn't place himself above others, but beside them. He led through tone, empathy, and the wisdom that radiated beyond his robe. He wasn't the feared judge, he was the respected one. In one hearing with a single mother, Caprio listened patiently as she explained she couldn't pay a fine because every cent went to feed her children. Any other judge might have applied the penalty and moved on. Caprio smiled and said, "You're doing what any mother would, protecting your children, and that is commendable." Fine dismissed. But not only that, Caprio turned her story into a public lesson that such quiet struggles deserve recognition, not punishment. To lead by example, in Stoicism, is the core of practical philosophy. Epictetus taught that virtue must be lived, not just preached. A leader who speaks of discipline but lives in luxury is a hypocrite. A judge who talks of justice but ignores human suffering is a tyrant. Leonidas, fighting beside his warriors, and Caprio, humanizing the robe of the court, proved that greatness lies in stepping down from the pedestal and walking with feet firmly on the ground. If these two men could speak with each other, perhaps the exchange would sound like this. Leonidas: "My men died for me because they knew I would die for them." Caprio: "People trust me because I never forgot what it means to be one of them." Both understood that real leadership cannot be imposed. It must be earned, and it's earned not with authority or titles, but with consistency between what one says and what one does. Leonidas earned Sparta's respect by being its most disciplined warrior. Caprio earned his community's respect by being its most compassionate judge. Each, in his own way, was a mirror of the values he hoped to see in the world. That is the essence of Stoic example, to live in such a way that your life becomes its own argument. When Leonidas's soldiers hesitated, they looked to him. When poor citizens trembled before Caprio, a single gesture, a word, a look was enough to make them feel understood, not condemned. In the end, to lead is to be the first to rise when all others kneel. It is to eat last, listen first, and carry the heaviest burden. That is the lesson that binds a Spartan king and a judge from Rhode Island. True leadership needs no power. It needs moral courage. The strength of sacrifice. To most people, sacrifice sounds like loss, like giving up something desired or suffering out of obligation. But for true Stoic leaders, sacrifice is the highest form of virtue. It is when one chooses, consciously and willingly, to deny themselves for something greater, the homeland, justice, honor, or humanity. And both Leonidas and Frank Caprio understood this, not as theory, but as lived destiny. Leonidas knew, from the first steps toward Thermopylae, that he would not return. His gesture was not impulsive. It was strategic, philosophical, symbolic. He knew that by dying with his men, he would create a myth, not of glory, but of resistance. His sacrifice did not defeat the Persians with spears. It defeated them with legacy. He proved that there are causes worth dying for, that death is not the end when it plants the seeds of a more honorable future. Frank Caprio, on the other hand, lived a long life. But he too made sacrifices. He could have chosen comfort, anonymity, the cold execution of law. Instead, he chose the harder path, to listen to every story, to open space for the pain of others, to endure the judgment of the legal elite for appearing soft. The time that many judges saved with short sentences, he spent understanding. That required sacrifice of time, energy, and personal ease. Perhaps Caprio's greatest sacrifice was keeping his heart open in a world that rewards indifference. To be kind requires courage. To be just requires risk. And he faced that daily, knowing that every empathetic ruling could draw criticism, but also had the power to heal a soul. In one of his most touching cases, Caprio judged a young father fined for speeding. The man explained he was rushing his daughter, burning with fever, to the hospital. Caprio paused, breathed deeply, and said, "You are a good father. And if this fine makes you doubt that, I'll cancel it myself." And so he did. In that moment, Caprio turned away from cold legality and embraced the warmth of justice. A small sacrifice on paper, but immense in the real world. In Stoicism, such choices are known as right actions, acts not driven by passion, but by reason and virtue. Seneca said, "A great soul rises above injury, pain, and death." Leonidas and Caprio embodied this, one on the battlefield, the other in the courts. Both knew that virtue comes at a cost, but the cost of silence is even greater. And maybe if these two men could meet, sitting on a bench between time and eternity, they would say, "Leonidas, I sacrificed my life so Sparta would not kneel. Caprio, I sacrificed my comfort so the small would not be crushed." These words may seem worlds apart, but they speak to the same soul, the one that understands service is greater than victory. That a man's value isn't measured by what he achieves, but by what he gives, even when no one is watching. In our modern world, where ego is praised and individualism is the norm, the example of these two giants shows that true power lies in letting go, in giving what we have, our time, our energy, our lives, for something beyond the self. Frank Caprio passed away remembered as the world's greatest judge. But this title was not earned through verdicts. It came from what he sacrificed to make justice truly just. Leonidas became legend not for slaying thousands, but for choosing to die with honor. Sacrifice is not loss. It's the highest investment a person can make, and that is what makes the leadership of these two men eternal. The invisible enemy, the ego. The most dangerous battlefield isn't covered in spears or blood. It lies within. It is where a silent war is waged against the ego, that invisible enemy that corrupts, deceives, and, if left unchecked, destroys even the most virtuous. Leonidas and Frank Caprio, separated by centuries, both understood that the greatest challenge of power is not letting it poison you. Leonidas, as king of Sparta, could have ruled with pomp and tyranny. His word was law, yet he chose example over imposition. He ate with his soldiers, trained alongside them, lived as they did. He never placed himself above them. His power came from the trust he inspired, not the fear he invoked. At his death, no statues rose immediately, only silence and reverence. He never had to proclaim his greatness. His ego was too disciplined for that. Frank Caprio lived in a society where judges often became untouchable figures, hidden behind formalities and distance. He took a different path. He rejected arrogance. He greeted people with a warm "good morning," asked about their lives, often shared in their emotions. Even as the highest authority in his courtroom, he made a point to show humanity. His ego never walked through the doors with him. In one hearing, Caprio judged a teenager accused of vandalism. Instead of delivering a sentence, he sat and listened. The boy had lost his father and was spiraling into rebellion. Caprio didn't use the moment for personal glory. He simply said, "You can still change, and I want to see you again. But next time, bring your school grades." There was no punishment, only guidance and humility. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, warned, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." And the ego hates that. The ego craves applause, recognition, control. But Caprio and Leonidas understood that true leadership means letting go of these desires. It means putting mission above image. Leonidas could have accepted the council's advice to retreat. He could have survived. He would have been remembered as the king who lived. But ego did not rule him. He chose to die for his principles rather than live betraying them. His victory wasn't physical, it was moral. To this day, his name means honor not because he survived, but because he surrendered everything for it. Caprio, throughout decades, faced cameras, praise, and fame, yet he never changed. He remained the same judge who greeted others with kindness, listened carefully, and smiled sincerely. That is rare. That demands an inner strength few possess. The strength to look in the mirror each day and remember the role is a duty, not an identity. In a world where many lose themselves at the first taste of power, these two giants remain beacons of humility. Ego did not guide them. They mastered it with discipline, awareness, and purpose. If they could meet, their words might be, Leonidas. Ego demands statues. Honor prefers silent remembrance. Caprio. Ego wants judgment. Justice sometimes only needs listening. Stoicism teaches that self-mastery is the true power. To control others is easy. To control oneself is rare. And from that control, the true leader is born. Leonidas and Caprio had nothing to prove to the world. They knew exactly who they were. That's the legacy they leave, that power only matters when wielded with humility. That recognition means nothing if it costs your soul. That the greatest enemy lives within, and only the wise win that war. Duty before name. Today, names have become brands. Celebrities, politicians, businessmen, they all strive to turn their names into symbols of power, influence, or success. But there are men who place duty above their own names, who understand that the mission comes before vanity. Leonidas and Frank Caprio belong to this rare lineage of leaders who didn't seek to be remembered, but to do what was right, even if no one was watching, even if no statue would stand in their honor. Leonidas, king of Sparta, could have used his title to exempt himself from sacrifice. He could have sent others to the front lines. But his vision was clear. If someone had to die for Sparta, it had to be him. His name, at that moment, was not more important than the safety of Hellas. He wasn't trying to make history, he was trying to protect the present, and he did. The price was his life, but the legacy was eternal. Frank Caprio also held a position of authority, but he never used his name as a shield or a bargaining chip. He didn't seek privileges. He never expected special treatment. He walked into court as a public servant, not as a celebrity. In every hearing, he placed the duty to listen, to understand, and to deliver justice above the vanity of appearing tough or exemplary. His name only became known because he never placed it above people. In one unforgettable session, a distressed father explained that he had accumulated fines for parking in front of a school while dropping off his child with a disability. Caprio could have coldly applied the law and moved on, but he didn't. He said, "You're a good father. You're putting your child first, and that matters more than any fine." The judge could have sought the applause that comes with strictness. Instead, he chose the silent strength of compassion. Duty spoke louder than name. This is a vital point in Stoicism. The great philosophers warned against vanity. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Soon you will be dead, and your name will be forgotten. do good while you can. To the Stoics, the only true fame is that which is engraved in the soul of those touched by our actions, not in plaques of marble. Leonidas knew this. When he marched with his 300, he left no instructions for temples to be built in his honor. His concern was with the impact of resistance, not with the glory that might follow. He understood that leadership is service, that death is acceptable, so long as duty has been fulfilled. That is why, even without seeking it, his name became a symbol of unbreakable honor. Caprio, in his quieter way, followed the same path. Instead of placing himself as an icon, he became a mirror, a reflection of empathy, of listening, of humanity within the legal system. His fame came late and was never pursued. It was a consequence, not an ambition, because his mission was greater than his name, to restore faith in justice. If they could meet, perhaps they would say, Leonidas. If the name survives, it's because the duty was fulfilled. Caprio. Those who seek fame lose focus. Those who serve build eternity. This is the lesson of great men. They don't worry about remembrance. They worry about impact. They don't want to be worshipped. They want to be useful. And when life ends, as it now has for Caprio, what remains is not a gilded name, but the seeds he planted in thousands of hearts around the world. The eternity of a just act. Time erases monuments, cities crumble, empires fall, books are lost. But there is something that time can never destroy, the power of a just act. When a man acts with virtue, even in silence, even alone, that act reverberates. It echoes through the centuries. It touches hearts he will never know. That is how heroes become eternal, not through fame, but through moral integrity. Leonidas died at Thermopylae over 2,000 years ago. Yet his example continues to inspire soldiers, leaders, and ordinary people to stand firm when all seems lost. His life was not defined by conquests, but by his integrity in the face of death. He taught us that true glory lies not in victory, but in the posture one assumes when facing the impossible. Frank Caprio, in contrast, lived in a modern world of laws, courtrooms, and cameras. Yet instead of using all this to exalt himself, he used it to uplift others. With his gentle voice, his compassionate decisions, and his unwavering sense of justice, he achieved something few do. He gave dignity back to those forgotten by society. A just act, no matter how small, holds within it the power of transformation. A verdict of forgiveness, a glance of understanding, a courageous decision. These create ripples. And when enough ripples combine, they form tides that can change the course of the world. That's why if the world has more Caprios and more Leonidases, we will undoubtedly have a more just, more honest, and more principled world. Our time on this earth may be brief. We may never be remembered by name. But the truth is, following the example of brothers like Leonidas, the Stoic before Stoicism, and Frank Caprio, the world's kindest judge, we know that humanity always deserves another chance. Because in every act of bravery, in every display of empathy, goodness reveals itself. It may not make headlines, it may not roar, but it endures. And when the world grows dark, it is from the memory of these great souls that light returns. Not to make us worship them, but to remind us of what we're capable of. If you've made it this far, it's because you feel that too. Because you understand that justice, courage, and compassion aren't just lofty ideas. They're daily choices. And the legacy of true giants never dies. It lives on in everyone who is inspired, who transforms, and who carries the mission forward. If this small tribute moved you, and you also admire the legacy of Leonidas, the king who faced the impossible, and Frank Caprio, the judge who believed in the human heart above the error, share this video with a friend. Leave a like, turn on notifications, and subscribe to our channel, because the world needs more people like you. Until next time.